and welcome to the Truth and Data podcast, where each week we tackle a different digital forensics topic. I'm Jessica.
I'm Kim.
And I'm Debbie.
And with us today we have the amazing Adam. Today's topic we are going to be talking about, and I'm so excited for this, RAM. That's right, random access memory as available on mobile devices. And, I'll give the interlude as to my joy about this is in November 2024, so just over a year ago, I was in Brisbane, Australia for DFRWS, and I ran into an old friend who I hadn't seen in forever, Adam, who's with us today from MSAB, and he pulled me aside and said, Jessica, I've got to show you what we figured out. And ever since then, I've been super excited about this. So I'm excited that Adam was able to come on the show today and be our guest so we can talk about the value and what can be done with mobile RAM. But we'll start by letting our amazing guest introduce himself. Adam, do you want to give us a little background, who you are, why people should care about what you have to say today?
Yeah, of course. And thank you for firstly having me on the show. And
Absolutely.
for those who connected with me on LinkedIn know that I like to talk about RAM. And so my current position with MSAB is Deputy Director of Tech Sales. So I'm very fortunate that I get to look after an amazing, talented bunch of people who all they want to do is just help the customer get the most out of the products they already have. So I'm very honored to lead that team. We've got some really exceptional talent. And for those of you who aren't aware of who I am, so I joined MSAB in 2019, having served 15 years as a police officer in the UK, as you can tell from the accent, where I spent the majority of my career in a forensic lab. And I worked the sausage factory side of things, so the acquisition, before I moved into the deep analysis and sort of started to unearth what the tools don't reveal to you. And that's what really appealed to me. I enjoyed that part because I was solving a puzzle that had never been solved.
Absolutely.
I enjoyed that part. And that's what truly excites me about RAM, because it is unsolved.
Yeah, and that's why I'm so excited to have you on, right? So a year and a half ago, we met in Brisbane, and actually, funnily enough, obviously, Kim, Debbie, and I, as you can tell by our accents, are American, but from 3 different regions in the U.S., which you can also tell by our accents if people are astute, and I think that's pretty easy. The fast talking Northeasterner speaking right now, and what's really cool is we actually just got for the Truth and Data podcast, we just got our Spotify Wrapped results yesterday. And I only mention this because I said we met in Brisbane when we first started talking about RAM. And while the US is our most viewing country of the podcast, Australia is our second. So that's kind of cool. I was actually surprised it was Australia ahead of the UK, but that's okay. Maybe our UK audience will increase because we have Adam on. But I thought that was pretty cool that we have a high viewership in Australia. Anyhow, in Brisbane when we met, what you were showing me was, hey, look, we can actually extract RAM from mobile devices. And for folks who are not familiar, the last time I saw RAM was pre-Android 6, which Android 6 Marshmallow introduces encryption, right? Full disk, not file-based. We won't get into the nitty-gritty of that here. But when that happened, we stopped getting RAM. Like, I remember using Lime on Android devices and the things I used to find back then. But the big difference is not only have mobile devices evolve, so it's exciting that we have the opportunity for RAM again, but also the way in which mobile devices are used has greatly evolved in the 9 years. So my first question is, can you just tell us what devices in general, like not specific, I'm not saying we get RAM on the Samsung A25 and on the Pixel 6 but not the 6a, that's not what I'm asking. What I'm asking is this an Android thing, is this an iOS thing, is this limited only to one manufacturer? Can you tell us kind of broadly, where is RAM, where can we expect to get RAM?
Yeah, so you're going to get RAM from Android devices. We haven't sort of delved into iOS on this. So this is purely Android devices, and all of the leader manufacturers that you can think of, we're grabbing RAM from. So yeah, really exciting stuff.
That's exciting. It's exciting to hear that it's a wide swath of Android. So if you're seeing Android in your cases, right, what is the value to being able to get RAM? Like, okay, so we can get this. But is this we're getting something that we're going to get in the full file system acquisition anyway?
No. And this is what truly excites me. And for those who have used RAM in computers, and I remember the first time I was exposed to what I could get from RAM in computers, it was like, I don't want to do deadbox anymore, because you realize the potential of, and the difference with computers and phones here is that you do not lose the contents of RAM when a phone is powered off.
What?
That's the biggest difference.
Wait a second. So the big thing in computer mobile, and Kim, you could probably speak to this, is on scene. You had to train whoever was on scene to capture RAM. It couldn't wait till it came back to the lab. So you're telling me that for RAM on mobile, even if the device is powered down, we could get the RAM.
Correct.
So do we need the passcode?
You don't always need the passcode. So that's part of our tool. We'll be able to grab that RAM without the passcode. But the biggest thing here is, obviously, if a device is powered down and restarted, RAM can be flushed. It can become more fragmented.
Okay.
So keeping a device in AFU is our recommendation. But part of our process may be to reboot to exploit anyway.
Well, I'll pull this back to the SWGDE best practices for mobile. And, you know, the gist of the extraction port is keep it in whatever state it's in. If it's off, leave it off. If it's on, leave it on. And this even exasperates this because some people are like, well, if it's off, what's the big deal if I turn it on and try a BFU extraction? The thought here is try to do the, maybe try to do the RAM extraction even before the BFU, right?
Correct.
Now, the good thing is Adam and I are both part of SWGDE, so I know we both had influence in that document. There are no authors on SWGDE documents. It's by the whole community. I encourage people to check it out. But when you see memory in there, it's really important for people to realize that from a procedural perspective. Kim?
Yeah. And
oh, go ahead.
I think the biggest thing, and Kim can probably back up on this as well, is RAM holds a lot of data that is never intended for long-term storage. I always liken it to the post-it note that you have on your desk. Sometimes the content of that post-it note will make it into a long-term file.
I have lots of those.
At other times, it's just disregarded. And capturing RAM from mobile allows you to capture all of that data.
So I have a couple of questions. I mean, like if we are going to, if we collect RAM, like say from a Windows machine, then oftentimes there is a particular structure that it may be a bit of a challenge for you to figure out what that structure is, right? But how does that go, or how does that translate to mobile, or does it at all? What are we looking at in terms of what are we actually getting?
So mobile is harder, because you can think of all the different variants of Android. You've got device manufacturer, version of Android. So we have a tool called Ramalizer that comes free with our analytical tool and with our extraction tool. And Ramalizer is it's built similar to Volatility because we didn't want to change. People are used to Volatility, but the difference here is that you don't have to give Ramalizer profiles. It will automatically discover the correct device profile. So then you're going to get your process IDs, and which allows you to, any data that you find within RAM, as long as you got those process IDs, you can then start to give it context. So that's the hardest part for our developers with Ramalizer, is all of the different flavors of Android.
Right. So this is the same as all the different profiles that we have in traditional RAM thinking. And so actually, basically, a difference between Volatility 2 and Volatility 3 is the newer Volatility 3. You don't need to give a profile to. So what's cool, though, is if you have the PIDs, and I assume you're going to have the parent process IDs too, then you can build out a process tree. So immediately, there are two types of investigations that come to my mind where RAM could be powerful. Number one would be malware investigations.
Hugely.
Especially since I feel there is a lack of knowledge in doing malware investigations on mobile, but partly because of a lack of access. I know on the iOS side, I've been getting super stoked by, ps.text that comes in the sysdiagnose logs. I know this is one of Kim's favorites because it gives us the PIDs and the parent process IDs, and we can look at each thing launching each other process. So you're telling me I can do a very similar thing, I assume, in RAM, where I can. So
Yeah.
So from there, in addition to malware, the second thing, and this is kind of where I was going when I mentioned that I was really excited about this because of the difference of how people use their phones. Hexordia, we did a big project on cryptocurrency apps and what was left behind in cryptocurrency apps. And we were allowed to able to find a lot of data in the clear. If anyone's interested in that, we have all of the results of the project are on our digital products downloads for free, open to the public. Please go learn.hexordia.com, digital products, and grab that. But I can't imagine what cryptocurrency artifacts I might be able to find in RAM. Do you know if that use case has been used or what other use cases are being used for using RAM analysis on Android?
Yeah, I'm not aware of any crypto cases that have been run.
Okay.
I know that.
Well, you're giving me something to research.
Yeah, definitely. I know one of the areas we have looked into is location data. And there's a huge amount of location data that's sitting in RAM. And that's quite understandable when you know that your mobile device is constantly talking to access points. So sometimes those access points, along with MAC addresses, can be easily discovered from RAM.
That's pretty cool.
Mm.
Debbie, you've got to have questions about how leadership is going to address this.
I'm still listening.
That's all good.
I'm formulating my questions.
That's totally good.
The biggest differentiator, Debbie, for leadership is this changes people's processes. Because if they're trying other tools before trying to capture RAM, you're potentially trampling over that crime scene.
Interesting. Okay, no, that absolutely makes sense. Having obviously different or new capabilities, is always going to affect processes. And I mean, being able to find additional evidence, additional data that maybe was not easily, retrievable before, amazing.
Yeah. And it's understandable because I work for a tool vendor, and one of the things we have to do is when we exploit is we have to remove our exploits. And we may do that by clearing the contents of RAM. So if you've tried another vendor, they probably are doing similar. So if you tried that vendor first, you're then making RAM capture pointless.
So it makes the order of operations really, really critical. And that goes back to that SWIG-DE chart, right? So you want to trigger any logs that you can trigger, right? Not necessarily collect them, but trigger them. Pull RAM, pull logs, BFU, AFU, full file system. I'm being very generic. There's lots of if, then, whats.
Yeah.
The fact that this works potentially on some lock devices is not something I was aware of. I thought that we could only try this on AFU. I did want to bring up something really cool. So a lot of folks might be going, well, I don't have access to a tool today that can get me RAM, and I'd love to play with it. So I have something pretty cool to share with people. And normally, we don't, I'm not hawking any tools. That's not what we do here. We're talking about the concept. But if anybody wants to get access to RAM, I'm fortunate that Hexordia is building a capture the flag for the MSAB virtual digital forensics summit that's going to be online. I don't know the dates. I'm just building the CTF. And I'm sure Adam will share that in a minute. But folks who register, that data set does include RAM. So if anybody's interested in getting their hands on a RAM data dump, that is going to be an awesome way for you to do it. And have challenging questions. Obviously, intentionally, we're writing some of the questions that can only be answered from RAM. So, Adam, can you just tell people, we'll put the link in the show notes, but can you tell people the dates? And
Yeah.
I'm so bad at that part.
So March. So the digital summit is March 10th through to 12th, and I think the capture the flag goes live on the 12th, I believe.
Awesome. And it's 3 hours. It's a team event. So it's really cool because people can play in teams. But what I'm most excited about is, there's multiple phones. There's a fun scenario. I'm not going to give away any details of that. I'm not even telling Adam. But because we want it to be a surprise to everyone who plays, but there will be a RAM capture. And I am so stoked about a RAM capture. And if you're curious about playing a CTF, we did do an episode with Kevin Pagano all about CTFs, why you should play them. So if your ears just perked up and you were like, I want that RAM, but I'm nervous about CTF, number one, just try. Just try. No one says you have to win, right? And no one says you have to even put your real name in, but try. This is an opportunity to play with a data type you haven't seen and maybe figure out, holy crap, this is something we need to evaluate for our processes to see if RAM collection is important to us.
And I'm really looking forward to, and I know Jessica and I have spoke about the population of data that we're having to be really careful with the device that we're leaving RAM. So just to give people a taster, the gentleman who sort of first discovered RAM for MSAB, a gentleman called Dave Lauder, he has discovered things such as, because apps all run in RAM, and he found the Honeyboard, so it's the keyboard application for Samsung. He could see every key press that one of the testers had done. So he saw each key press for the username, and he saw each key press for the password, even the delete key being used.
So this is used for attribution. Like, you can't tell me the malware did it if I can tell the key was depressed.
Correct.
So I've been using unified logs for this on iOS, and I'm going to go to like the iOS relationship here just so people have that contextual comparison. So whereas we're not getting memory on iOS, unified logs are huge. And Kim and I have some workshops coming up on unified logs and sysdiagnose logs that we're doing all over the place. I'm doing one. I know this will air after that, but I'm doing one in Florida ICAC in 2 weeks. And in unified logs, which also has the PIDs and the PPID, sysdiagnose logs has the PIDs and the PPIDs. But when we get into the unified logs, I was on a case the other day, and I'm now going through the unified logs at the moments of importance on every case because I can see exactly that item. I get that the keyboard is being used for input. Now, I don't get stroke by stroke, but I get an order app opened, keyboard used for input, and then whatever the next step is that was taken in the app. And I'm using that to demonstrate this wasn't a system action, this was a user interaction, because there's a lot of things that systems do versus users. So I love the use of RAM here to be able to display the difference between a user and a system action. Because a lot of what we see in RAM is going to be system actions, correct, I assume. Yeah. So that's fantastic. I love that.
But yeah, he also discovered URLs that were run from in private browser mode that clearly weren't committed to the DB in the end, but they're still sat there in plain text within RAM.
That is fantastic. I love that. Because in private browsing is something that is always an issue in a lot of cases.
Yeah, and there's a lot of things that we've discovered, and I know, Jessica, you saw a talk in Boston, which we can't talk about in public domains. Right. We don't want to spoil it for everybody, but...
Well, the cool thing about the CTF is there's self-discovery there. People get to play with it and see it. And you were talking about the steps that we're taking. So, we don't even trust this device even... in ways that we normally would trust a device. Like our normal procedures are, of course, we Faraday and blah, blah, blah. We are being so cognizant of this device. This device is living and existing in a place that's public, and it's staying in that public place. And then it is being shipped to the office for acquisition, and it is not going, usually test devices, they go home with people, they just go in Faraday bags. We're treating this extremely differently because of what we've noticed during our test acquisitions, was extremely enlightening. And so I'm sure folks will be enlightened. And if I can just make the plug again, it is worth it to sign up for this CTF, to get exposed to this data source so you can see, is this useful? And what's cool is not only will you have the RAM, you'll have the full file system extraction. So you'll be able to compare, oh shit, I can't, oh, excuse my language, I'm not supposed to curse on the podcast. Oh my, I could not find that in the full file system extraction, but it's blaring in the RAM.
Yeah. I'm super excited to see what people discover. Because even Heather Charpentier mentioned, because she had a play with RAM and sort of got it included for IASIS, and she dug a phone out of her drawer that had been turned off for a year and captured deleted text messages. So the potential is huge.
So there's another one, right? Like deleted text messages in RAM is, you know, we're talking about in private browsing, deleted text messages. So it's not just the things I brought up with that, where we know they're only unencrypted in RAM. It's the potential to get data that may have been inadvertently or intentionally removed from active storage. I do wonder how that's going to work with deleted apps, right? Because sometimes we have deleted apps and we can see that the app was previously installed and launched, but we don't necessarily have the data from it. So that might be really interesting too. So you're giving me all these things to play with,
test.
To look for.
Yeah.
Well, that's exactly what it is. So one of the other things I'm really interested in, though, now is also testing order of operations, and maybe somebody out there is also interested in this. So the things I wrote down for myself for testing for possible white papers and research is really looking at crypto and RAM, and also looking at this order of operations in terms of, because I've been really into, if anyone's seen Alex, the tool Alex from Christian Porter, who also makes UFADE, this is his new tool, and he's actually made it really easy to capture all the logs. So I was capturing like the crash logs and the logcat, and now he's just got it in one button. So it's actually really nice, because so now I want to check if does doing my log acquisition prior to my RAM acquisition, like how does the order of operations affect the footprint of what I'm getting back?
Yeah.
Right. So that's a really interesting testing possible paper.
I'm looking forward to Christian getting hold of the RAM. I know we've had a few sort of offline discussions, Christian and I, about it, and really looking forward to seeing what he can discover in there.
Yeah, because I really do like the idea of looking at the order of operations, because I've been finding really, really good stuff in the logs, and then it's kind of like, where is the comparison, the overlap, and the differentiation between what I can get from Logcat and the crash logs and all this different logging that exists on Android. Again, kind of akin to SDLs and ULs on iOS. SDL and UL, sysdiagnosed log and unified log, and really seeing that difference. That's so important, because again, now this affects, you know, to Debbie's point, what's happening on scene with what do we do first? What do we do next? Who does it, right? Is this something... And if we can get the lab to the device without it having to be done in the field, that's a win too. To me, I don't know what you think, or if you prefer those things done in the field. But
is this something that would be able to be done in the field?
For certain devices, you can do a very quick RAM dump. It literally takes minutes. Mm-hmm. We've had some customers in the UK who part of their role is to go out and check sex offenders on area, to make sure they're complying with their conditions. And one of their conditions could be, for example, not to have certain types of application. And of course, as the officer walks up the path to the front door, the first thing they're going to quickly do is delete that application.
Of course. Well,
doing a quick extraction of RAM is going to show you if it's a running process. So they're starting to use it in that front.
Now, is this like, I used to joke about doing process memory on computers. Magnet had a tool, RAM capture, and Magnet also had a tool that would do process memory collection. And I used to joke that I would do the process memory collection first because I can collect process memory before you say I retract consent.
Yeah.
Right? Like, it's so quick that they can, if they gave consent, they can't even retract it before you'd be done, right? Like, it's, Kim's laughing because
No, that's
right, like they can't even revoke consent as quickly as you can capture it. And if you're walking on scene to a CSAM case and they've live active got it done on there, you've got them, right? You've got the evidence.
That was a concern all the time when we're entering a house, if they are going to be actively deleting.
Yeah, I know part of our process at the moment. I'm not going to name the
agency,
the phone vendor.
Oh, okay.
One of the phone vendors we can get just extract RAM from. That's all you're going to do. Where other ones as part of the actual extraction and exploit process. But some of our customers, and I think it's in a development request with us now, is they would like the ability to dump the RAM, have that separated while the exploit is still continuing, so they can start to search through it. So,
well, then you're getting
lead into your example.
Then you're getting active information at the scene that could inform the interview.
All of that's very important in the CCM cases.
Yeah, hugely.
And yeah, informing the interview is something that's been critical even in like the IC cases that I used to work. Being able to get information that you can utilize to further or more intelligently and accurately question whoever you're talking to, suspect, witness, victim, etc. Really, that information can be critical, especially if with things like deletions. Now, what about the temporal nature of this data? Is this like something that's like super time sensitive?
So we have some recommendations so the data is less fragmented. So we give advice around that. Obviously, continually rebooting a device is going to fragment the RAM. So like we said, if you've got a locked device, keep it in that AFU state. And generally, I don't want to voice on air, but our recommendation to stop it being fragmented. But
so just keep the device in the state, like maintain state. Maintain if it's on, if it's on, leave it on. Put a battery power on it so it doesn't have to reboot. If it's off, leave it off so you're not doing a reboot, because every reboot is going to fragment. And assumably when you mean fragment, it's not that the data disappears, it's that it's no longer contiguous.
Correct. And what happens there is you would then lose the ability to use our Ramalizer tool, which would then allow you to see the process. You'd literally just be scraping a raw dump. So you'd find data, but without context.
Again, it would be non-contiguous. It just separates out, and that makes a lot of sense in terms of how things work. And also, every reboot you're risking. Are you triggering garbage collection? Are you triggering? So there's potential not only fragmentation of data, but also actual degradation and loss. So you're saying it's not temporal in terms of time or to your knowledge, right? Because who knows what we're going to learn as people do more research, etc., with RAM dumps. But it is, it does degrade, and we'll call that a degradation, the lack of context and continuity with frequent reboots. So the recommendation again is whatever state the device is in, maintain that state. Keep the power on, keep the power off, whichever is applicable. Well, that's good, because that at least goes along with everything. Debbie and I have a good presentation that we've been doing on, and actually, well, hopefully it gets accepted. We submitted it to the summit. Now I feel like I just gave you pressure to accept this. And ironically, we accidentally both submitted it and we didn't tell each other, because that's what happens when you both write it down.
Well, you told me.
I told you.
I didn't tell you.
Right. So I put a note. I put a note in our system. Hey, I submitted this, and Debbie's like, oh, I already did. So anyway, that was our bad communication.
You put it on the Trello card.
But we so much want to hope that it gets accepted, that we did it. And it's really around that, like the importance of how, what happens at the scene affects the evidence that you get. And it's
Yeah.
all our recommendations for what you do on scene. And what I'm glad to hear is that what you said aligns with what's in our content that we already built in terms of our recommendations for on-scene personnel who are dealing with mobile devices and understanding what they need to do to allow for the best results from the lab.
Yeah. And the biggest part, and it still surprises people, and Kim, probably when you first heard about the mobile RAM, it was probably the biggest shocker for you, because you're always taught, do not pull the plug on the PC because you're going to lose that RAM, and people automatically just think the same as for mobile. Whereas the mobiles, of course, it's got an onboard battery that keeps everything in a state for us. As Heather found out when she dug the Samsung out of her drawer that sat there a year, that data was still sat there.
But I wouldn't rely on that
No.
BIOS battery as opposed to the actual power down battery.
You know, tell me a little bit about, I mean, I know in digital forensics, our very, very, very favorite thing to say is it depends. But do you have a large variance of data that you're seeing, or the way that it's structured in terms of what you're getting, depending on the make, model, and the OS and things along those lines? Is there a big difference in the structure?
The structures are hugely different, and that's the biggest challenge for our development team. Like I would say the most popular Android is the one that we're going to support the most, because it's a lot easier to build those profiles because we've got a good understanding of, you know, the headers, but the amount of data that's sat in RAM, that's not changing.
How big are these dumps?
Well, most phones nowadays, even low spec, you're talking 8 gigabyte of RAM, which is a lot of data.
That's incredible.
If anybody's listening to this audio, you just missed the
faces.
The faces that Kim and I both gave when you just said 8 gigs.
Yeah, well, even Apple are shipping 8, and they're notorious low for how much RAM they include. So Samsung, I think the maximum is over, I think it's 24 now.
Wow. Wow, that's a lot of data. You know, once everyone gets their hand on these dumps, trying to dig through them is going to be an event.
So I've got a test device here, and Debbie will like this. So.
Oh my gosh.
And this is
so for those on the audio, it had one of Debbie's Nerd
Yeah.
Cop stickers.
And this is an S21, so old now, but even this has 8 gig of RAM. So it sort of tells you the amount of data that potentially at the moment people aren't even considering.
Yeah, that's incredible, especially if it's including these things that you were mentioning in private browsing, deleted data, maybe deleted apps, process IDs for being able to track malware. So it doesn't matter if you're doing corporate investigations or knock and talks on CSAM, there's potentially data of interest here. That I think, and I mean, I'd love to put a poll out, and maybe I will. Maybe I'll throw a poll out, which would go out way before this, of just how many people are collecting RAM in their Android extractions. And I bet you it is extremely low. I'll probably throw that out on LinkedIn because now I'm just interested, right? Like how many people even realize that this is a thing, capturing RAM on modern Android.
And that's my hope for the Capture the Flag, because yes, I work for a tool vendor, but ultimately my passion is knowing that forensic examiners have got all the access to all of the data possible, so we can do our jobs effectively. Right. Because you only know what you know at the time, but hopefully this Capture the Flag is going to give that data to the wider masses so they can understand what potentially is in there.
And you're going to hate what I'm going to say here, but Hex Audio, we teach with all open source, vendor neutral tooling. and I want to be clear, like, we're not promoting any product here, but what I'm actually excited for is because the only people who have access to RAM currently, and Adam is going to hate me for this, the only people who have access to RAM currently are going to be customers who have this tool. I'm curious about what people who aren't handicapped by looking only at what the tool parses are able to find when they're looking at this RAM and trying to restructure and make sense of it in the questioning of the CTF, what they're able to discover that is not parsed by the tool. Because that's all, and you said that's what you loved about your job in law enforcement when you were an analyst, and that's like our goal in everything we teach. You know, we are even in our mobile forensic analysis course, like our entry level mobile course, our goal by the end of the week is that our people who take our class are parsing unsupported apps, 0 to hero, even if they've never touched a mobile examination before. By the end of the week, they can parse unsupported apps. In our data structures class, getting people into data, and we use all open source and freeware. So I'm excited about people who are going to go the route of going, well, I don't care about what the tool gets. What can I find? What can I discover that's outside of that? And then the write-ups that they share with the community about how they found those things. Because then that gets people thinking about how to dig into RAM, how to discover the unexpected, and how to really get that next level of analysis, because you know, we may be famous for writing questions that the tools can't answer, and so that's kind of where we start. We'll ask questions that the tools can answer so people can see, but then we want people to think, and we want people to figure things out and go that beyond step, because we're trying to build that mindset that we're not stopped as examiners just because the technology isn't there yet, that we can answer the unexpected.
Well, that's my other biggest passion. And
I know.
One thing that scares me is the amount of people who rely on push button. And again, I work for MSAB, but do not trust our tool. Validate, verify, go into the databases, explain what the tool is produced for you. Because if you're not doing that, MSAB is not going to stand and give testimony with you. It will be you in that box. So you have to understand what we're showing you, because we're human. We could make mistakes.
I'm going to remind the audience of one of my favorite expressions, which is, if you're going to testify, you need to test if I understand the data.
Yeah.
Like, it's that simple. Debbie likes that one.
I do. I do have a question from my perspective. Is this something that has been added to an existing tool, or is this a new product?
So it's been added to our existing tool.
Okay.
So originally, we have a premium extraction tool, and it was part of that because it got you into higher end devices running these processes. It's now included, or the RAMalyzer tool. So the mobile volatility, I'll call it, is included in our analysis tool. But in order to use it, you need the extraction tool. So it's kind of catch-22.
Okay.
But originally, this tool was built for mobile. That's what it was built for. This is where the research was born. It was RAM decoder, Jessica, if you remember.
I do.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we have to take a moment to explain what For Mobile was, which I was briefly involved with. Luckily, I felt honored because I think there were only 2 Americans involved. It was me and Heather Mahalik. So if you could please explain what the For Mobile project was, because that was awesome. Just the project overall and what its goal was.
Yeah, so it was European funded by the European Union to basically provide law enforcement and public sector organizations with standards and new tools and techniques into mobile forensics. And like Jessica indicated, it collectively got a group of individuals from across the globe to contribute to that project, and a lot of tool vendors, and we're all involved to help build new standards and different tools, and RAM decoder was one of them.
I want to be clear. I don't think that the project was anti-American. I think that the time zone for the project meant that I was up at 2 a.m. for the meetings, and I think Heather Mahalik and I may have been the only 2 people who were crazy enough to take that regular meeting at 2 a.m. And it wasn't just like a listen meeting. This was a participate, you're writing documents meeting, kind of like SWIGDE or the Scientific Working Group on Digital Evidence or NIST OSAC. This was a working meeting, and you had to have your brain on. So I do think it was a time zone issue. And only some of us were crazy enough to still want to participate.
So going back to your question, Debbie, it was founded through the 4Mobile project, and then we obviously saw, hey, when the 4Mobile project ended, we realized this is huge. We need to continue with this, and that's what's happened.
Gotcha. The EU is so much has been so much better about providing funding for this sort of thing that doesn't really happen as much in the United States, to actually promote digital forensics research. So I always find that interesting that the government is supporting that.
I will give an objection there, because Hexordia has been funded on 2 projects that were research based that were for the public community. We had one that was DOJ funded for IoT analysis, research, acquisition and analysis, and the crypto project I mentioned before. And if anyone needs access to those data sets and you can't find it, just email us. I'll link you to it, but that is all available. The IoT is available only to law enforcement, but I'll give you access to that. And the crypto is publicly available. And so those were both research projects funded by the Department of Justice.
By the government.
Right. Yeah. So we don't get it at the same level, but we do get some research. There are. I don't know of any current ones. Those mostly ended at the end of the fiscal year. So since October 1, I don't know of any publicly. Doesn't mean they don't exist.
But I think you're right, Debbie, and there's some great work being done across the entire globe that will assist people in this sort of industry. And it's about breaking down those barriers and not working in silos. And if something that's been discovered in Spain, then the rest of the community needs to hear about it, because we all benefit.
Now, that said, I just want to be clear. I think that we do need more funding for research in this field. These items can't be self-discovered. Law enforcement that's working active cases does not have the backlog to support it. And there are organizations, and full disclosure, like Hexordia, which literally do government contracted research. And we have a list of things that we think need researching that just need funding to research. A lot of it in mobile forensics, and a lot of it critical to being able to analyze what's currently available, but no one actually knows that the data's there, right? And this is problematic, right? Like, data that exists that isn't being exposed.
How long is the wish list at the end of a SWIGDE meeting?
Oh my gosh. So, and for folks who don't know, SWIGDE is the Scientific Working Group on Digital Evidence. Please go to swigde.org. I am going to put the link, because I mentioned the paper for the mobile acquisitions best practices. And it's folks from all over the globe, and it's capped at 125, but it's members from defense, prosecution, right? So people who do work on both sides of the house. It does include academia. It includes practitioners. It includes practitioners from government. It includes practitioners from private sector. It includes people from corporate analysis to
full developers.
The full scope. And there's actually rules and regulations in our bylaws to ensure that we're evenly balanced. So we require a certain number of people from each sector. And then we do work on these documentations, and there's multiple teams. There's a team that's focused just on audio, a team that's focused on image, image as in photography image, not image as in forensic image. There is a forensics group, which is the largest one, and the one that Adam and I both participate in that group. There is one, but there's one on video. So specifically on video, which right now video authentication is a huge thing. There is a group, and this is the coolest one, there is a group just on quality assurance that looks at lab processes, and that has a lot of Debbie folks, more of your caliber, who have worked in leadership and understand full dynamics of how the lab functions. And there are people there from NIST, and there are people there from the tool vendors, and all the vendors, the major vendors are represented, etc. And so it is just and what we do is we get together 3 times a year, and we spend a week writing documentation, and then that documentation goes through an internal review process, gets voted on, and then goes out for public comment. And folks may not know this, but every single public comment needs to be adjudicated. And I think we should do an episode on standards development. That might be boring to some people, but I think it's really important, because SWGDE is actually a standards derivation organization. And I also know who exactly we can ask to be on that. And then, and I say this as someone, full disclosure, I'm a member of both SWGDE and the NIST OSAC, which is the Organizational Scientific Area Committees. And this is, they actually take some of the SWGDE documents and put it on the NIST registry. So then they go through a secondary NIST OSAC review, and that winds up including things even like human factors, like things you wouldn't think about, because every single discipline then has to review the content for hosting on the registry. But that's a whole nother episode. But the point is that as we're doing these things, you know, we need standards bodies like that, but even beyond standards, we need pure research into things like RAM. Like, I would love if I could get a funded project to literally study RAM, and I know exactly on our team who would be incredible at doing that analysis and that deep dive, because we could probably discover, find, and, you know, be able to document and write tools for, you know, parsing wide swaths of this. But I'll stop saying my wish list, because we know that there is a huge wish list out there. Yeah, well, this is awesome. Adam, I want to thank you for coming on and really sharing about this source of data that we really haven't been exposed to as a community. And we'll share with you any questions we get from the audience. But thanks everyone for listening. And we hope you consider RAM in your future. And the best way to do that is sign up for the CTF and get to play with it firsthand. All right.
Thank you for having me on. And perhaps we'll do a follow-up after the CTF when we see
That's a good idea.
the findings.
Yes.
That actually is a really, really cool idea. See, you're filling up. Remember, we talked about the
I'll
Post-its.
schedule that.
Oh,
Yeah.
oh, Debbie's like, I'll schedule it. Excellent.
On it.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for joining us, and we hope you have a wonderful day. Bye.
Thanks all.
Bye.